Significant Coaching Podcast. I'm Coach Matt Rogers. I don't often get starstruck anymore, but I was blessed this week to sit down and talk coaching with one of the great basketball coaches the game has ever seen. And in my eyes, one of the greats at developing young men and helping them achieve their maximum potential. Coach Mike Jarvis has had a legendary career. After winning 3 straight state championships in the 70s and early 80s at Cambridge Rindge and Latin School in Massachusetts, where he developed and coached future Hall of Famer Patrick Ewing. Coach took over the college program at Division I Boston University and proceeded to lead them to 2 NCAA National Tournaments. In 1990, he took over the program at George Washington University, leading them to 4 NCAA National Tournaments. In 1993, his Colonials would beat John Calipari's #1 ranked UMass team twice during the regular season. Their national tournament run that year finally came to an end in the Sweet 16 in an epic battle with Chris Webber and Michigan's Fab Five. Coach would then move on to St. John's in the Big East in 1998, leading the Red Storm to the Elite Eight in 1999, the 2000 Big East Tournament Championship, and topped it off by winning the NIT National Championship in 2003. It's not often you get to talk to someone you idolized growing up, and Coach Jarvis was everything I hoped he would be. I loved his stories about the early years of coaching Patrick Ewing, coaching the U.S. Under-22 national team, and the McDonald's All-American game. He brought back great memories for me of watching his teams beat Coach K and Duke at Madison Square Garden, and then again at the place nobody won at, Cameron Indoor Arena. Coach Jarvis is truly one of the great gentlemen of the game and was a true joy for me to spend some quality time with. I'm so thankful for his kindness and generosity. If you're enjoying these conversations, I encourage you to subscribe on your platform of choice and leave me a comment with your thoughts and questions. You can always learn more and schedule with me at CoachMattRogers.com when you want more information. All right, let's get to it. Here's my conversation with legendary coach Mike Jarvis. When you look back at your career, in your amazing career, were there games that you remember that you're like, I know I can make it? Because you won 3 straight state championships, and then you jumped to the college level. Did you know that you were ready for that when you jumped?
Well, I believed I was and felt I was prepared for it because I had already, unbeknownst to a lot of people, I had already coached as an assistant coach in college for 7 years. So I brought a lot of college experience to the high school, and then it was a lot easier to transfer it back to the college level. And I had a great college coach, and he was like he was the best coach in New England, one of the best coaches ever. And so I was ready. And then of course, the good Lord sent me a kid by the name of Patrick Ewing, and that made it a lot easier. But not just Patrick, but a lot of really good kids in a city that has a rich basketball history and tradition. So everything was aligned properly.
So you had the year Patrick left Georgetown and got drafted. That's when you jumped to Boston, right? Was it?
Let me see. I'm trying to think because I stayed at the high school after Patrick left, and for some few years. Yes, I think it was the same year that my first year at BU was Patrick's last year at Georgetown.
What was he like as a player? How much development did you have to do with him to get him ready to play Division I basketball?
Well, we got a kid who had not really played basketball prior to coming to the United States. He came into the USA in, I forget what year it was, but he was like in the 7th grade.
Yeah.
And he was in a special school, which happened to be housed in the same gym, in the same building that my high school was. So his school occupied space in my high school building. And I first met him, his ed teacher, Steve Jenkins, brought him to the gym one day and introduced me to Pat and Pat to me. And he said, "Hey, coach, I'd like for you to work with this young man and teach him how to play basketball." So I said, so I asked Patrick, I says, you really want to play this game? He says, "Yes, sir." And I asked Steve, I says, "Why do you want him to play?" I figured Steve would tell me, well, he's tall and hey, most people think all the tall kids play basketball. Well, his answer was incredible. He said, "I want Patrick to make friends," because he said the kids are laughing at him because he's tall and he's skinny and he's clumsy. And I want him to make some friends. And I thought playing basketball would be a good way to do it. So he was introduced to the game of basketball with the express purpose of making friends. Well, during his high school career, he didn't make a lot of friends because he won like 99% of the time. And, right. And he was a ferocious player. And he went from being that little skinny kid. Because the first year I coached him at the high school level, he weighed 165 pounds.
How tall was he then?
He was about 6'9" then.
Wow.
And but by the time he was a senior, he grew to be basically 7 feet tall, and he was 235 pounds. So he put on 70 pounds and was pretty much all muscle. And all the kids who had beat up on him at the beginning, they got paid back at the end. So he didn't make a whole lot of friends, but he certainly became the best player in the United States.
How was his hands and feet when he got to you? I mean, because he never really played, right?
No, he didn't. His feet were good because he had small feet. In fact, I remember one year when we got free sneakers from a company called Spot Built, and then eventually Nike. And I think he wore like a 13 and a half. So he had small feet for a big guy, but he had great feet. He could run like a deer. His biggest problem was his hands. Typical, for a kid that didn't play basketball or baseball, his hands weren't very good. But as time went on, he could catch it. And, most of his shots were dunks. But he eventually became a pretty good free throw shooter and mid-range shooter. So he developed his hands over time because the better he got, the more guys wanted to pass him the ball.
How much better did you get as a coach having a kid with that kind of talent?
Well, coaches, as they say, they're only as good as their players. Of course, they're only as good as the players they help develop. But obviously, you almost think it's a lot easier than it really is, because a kid like Patrick, not only was he a talented kid, but he was so determined.
Right.
He would find different ways to help us win games. So, you get better, obviously, because you're able to do and try more things than most guys would. I could experiment with all kinds of things, especially at the defensive end, because I always had Patrick at the back line. So we did a lot of crazy things, but most of them worked because of Patrick.
Were you pressing at that point?
Yeah, but we were pressing, we were running. That was the history and the tradition of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Right. All the teams ran, they pressed. And so, yeah, we pressed that, and then, of course, you could press with Patrick, especially because you put him at the back and you almost hope they beat the press, because they're not going to score. So, yeah, but then, as any season goes on, anything goes on, you start, especially when you're playing against really good teams, you can't really beat them with a press. You got to beat them with solid half-court defense, especially as the season progresses.
Were you all man-to-man at that point?
We were, yes, in high school, we were all man-to-man. I was a Bobby Knight disciple, and I sort of didn't believe that, you should play any zone. So we didn't play any zone in high school, to be honest with you.
You jumped to Boston not long after that. What was the biggest lesson you learned from coaching at Cambridge in Latin? And then how'd you have to adapt?
Well, you know what? The biggest adjustment, probably the best thing that I did when I went from Cambridge to Boston was to basically keep it simple. And, we ran, especially the first year or two, we ran the same simple offenses and that we ran in Cambridge and at the high school level. And we really emphasized and worked probably 85% of the time on our defense. Because I always believed that if you worked on your defense, you were working on your offense. So we had tough, and I had tough kids at Boston University. I mean, my players, I mean, they just competed their butts off, and we were able to win a lot of games just because we outplayed a lot of people.
I went, I was like you, not with the depth that you did, but I was a college assistant and then I was a high school coach and then I jumped to the college level. The biggest challenge for me was really learning where to find the talent and get that talent into my school. Was that a challenge for you in those first years, or because you had so many good years as an assistant, did you feel like that was nothing? You were prepared for the recruiting side?
Well, fortunately for me, I hired a couple of guys that were really good recruiters, and I didn't really, my job was to sort of close the deals,
Yeah.
and I really relied heavily on my guys to find them and to bring them. And then my job, like I said, was to try to close. But they knew the kinds of kids that I wanted and the type of players that we wanted. So, I grew up watching and studying and breathing Boston Celtics basketball.
Right.
I tried to mold teams, build teams, and that sort of with that mindset. And we did the same thing at the college level. So I can thank Red Auerbach for basically giving me a blueprint for how to put a team together.
Absolutely. What was your first thought, point guard most years, to have that guy, that floor general, or were you thinking athletes, shooters, bigs? Where was your mindset when you started recruiting?
My mindset was it started really in the backcourt. Yes, with the guard position, because that's the position I played. I always felt that no matter how good your other players were, if you didn't have a good point guard, in fact, if you didn't have two good point guards, so I always tried to have two at least. And many times the 2 point guards would end up being my backcourt at the end of games when you have to close out games. And that was sort of like another thing that I learned from Red Auerbach, from the days of Sam and Casey Jones
Right.
after Cousy and Sharman. So, the more guards, the better, and of course, it's a lot easier. There are a lot more guards out there to recruit than big guys.
Did you always want to have a guy like Patrick in the back that could block shots so you could have that flexibility with your defense to take chances?
Wanted to, but not able to pull that off all the time. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have some really good forwards at BU.
Yeah.
George Washington. We were fortunate through international recruiting to have some good centers. Like, we had a kid by the name of Yinka Dare, who was
Yeah.
in the NBA, and Alexander Cool from Belarus. So we had some good big men at GW. St. John's was once again mainly guards and forwards.
Yeah.
So it varied at the different schools.
Well, those years I was in high school and early college for me, and I just loved your teams. I loved how hard they played. I loved how you guys moved the ball. I love the diversity of your defenses and all of that. When did you come into your own where you felt like, I know what I'm doing? Or do you feel like you were always adapting and learning as you went on?
I was always adapting and learning, but I really felt because of my college coach that he prepared me to coach at any level. And because, he taught basketball. I mean, he taught the game. And every year you go back to the basics, back to the drawing board, as he used to put it. And you would start at the very beginning, no matter how many players are returning.
Right.
It's like starting a new year in school, in academia, where usually the first couple of weeks, teachers review. And that's when students normally are at their very best. So that's how we approach basketball as well.
When you if I put you in a gym with a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds right now, where would you start in terms of developing them?
Well, I probably would. I mean, honestly, I might start with their conditioning, and just teaching them or getting them to understand how important it is for them to be stronger, in their core and in their shoulders and hands, and then I'd work on their footwork, and then I'd start with dribbling, with just basic dribbling, passing,
Yeah.
defense, and, footwork on
Yeah.
defense.
I had such a great high school coach in terms of teaching us pivots
Yes.
and how to use our space. And I'm amazed at how little I see that anymore. Kids always ask me, who was the best post player I saw. I think it was Michael Jordan. I
Yeah.
love Hakeem. I love Patrick. I love Duncan. I love David. But I'm not sure anybody had better footwork 10 to 15 feet from the basket than Michael.
When I used to run my summer basketball camps, the guys that I still remember to this day were guys that came in and worked on things on footwork, on how to make a jump stop and a pivot, and basically how to use your feet, whether you're on defense or offense.
And a lot of that goes back to Red, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, once again, some of the most basic, simple drills, that Red Auerbach used to take the Boston Celtics and, all the Hall of Famers that he had through.
Right.
They would spend hours and hours just working on their defensive stance and movement. And then, of course, getting in condition.
Yeah.
Red Auerbach, once again, he kept it simple. I remember once sitting down with him and he says, I had 6 plays. And those six basic, very simple plays that I used every year I ever coached. I figured if it's good enough for Red, it's good enough for me.
That's right. It's amazing. I think there's high school coaches and college coaches that are teaching Red Auerbach systems right now and have no idea where they learned them from or no idea where the genesis of those things were from.
And I guarantee you that 85, 90% of those guys are successful.
When you look at your career, Coach, what are the big challenges that you faced in terms of the other schools that you coached against, the teams you prepared for? Do you have any memories that kind of jump out at you? You're like, gosh, this is when I knew I had my team playing the best.
Well, one of the things I can share with you is I remember getting my team at St. John's prepared to play against Indiana and Bobby Knight in the tournament. And, we took pride in how great a defensive team we were. That was when I had, some pretty good players. And we're playing against Indiana. And not too long in the game, I called timeout. I called my team over and I said, guys, we haven't played any zone this year. But if we're going to win this game tonight, we're going to have to go play zone because as good as we are in defense, this man is the master. He's tearing us apart. So my guys looked at me and said, are you serious, coach? We're going to play zone? Yeah, we're going to play zone. And we went to zone. And we almost shut them out I can't tell you how many minutes, and we blew them out. That's probably the one night that I realized that, you know what, no matter how good you are at anything, you better be ready to adjust and adapt if you want to overcome.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple years later going to Kuwait with a group of college coaches to coach in a program called Operation Hardwood, where it was in Kuwait, and they had all the different services there for a basketball tournament. And we went and met with a general, and above the general desk was a plaque, and it said, adjust, adapt. At the bottom, it said, overcome. And that's what we coaches have to do. We got to adjust sometimes. Right. And you better be ready to adapt if you want to. Because we'd have got beat that night, and our season would have been over. Of course, it ended a couple of games later when we played Ohio State in the Elite Eight for a chance to go to the Final Four. But that happens.
Well, it's so hard when you watch 25 films on a team and they've played this defense all year long, and then all of a sudden they get to you and you're throwing something they've never seen at you.
And that the other lesson I learned from that night was to try to have something, even if it's just a little wrinkle on something that you do offensively or defensively the night you play a team. I remember we beat Duke in Madison Square Garden with a team that probably was a 20, 25-point underdog. And I think the main reason why we were able to beat them was we had made a couple of simple adjustments as to how we would enter into our offense. And we entered differently than we normally had. And I think it really threw them off. And it allowed us to stay in the game until our home court advantage could help us win the game.
Right. I remember that game.
That was at MSG, yep. And Marcus Hatton was my point guard. He was also my second. He was my all guard. He ran the point, but he was a great scorer, and he ended up stealing the ball at the very end of the game. I don't know if it was J.J. Riddick that made the pass or whoever made the pass, he stole it.
Wow.
He got fouled at the buzzer, and he made the free throw. We won the game.
I
That
remember that game. Yeah, I remember that clearly.
Yeah, it was like a Sunday after. I think a Sunday afternoon on CBS.
What does that do for your kids when they win a game like that? Was that a good thing the next day of practice, or did you have to get them refocused again?
Well, you always have to. The hardest thing sometimes is when you have success. So you always got to worry about getting guys refocused. But you have something that most people would never have, could always fall back on.
Yeah,
Teams beat Duke. Very few teams win a game like that. And but our guys, they always believed they could beat anybody. We just sometimes weren't talented enough to do that. But it helped us a lot, the fact that I had a team that went into Cameron and won a few years earlier. And, took 25 years for somebody else to go in and win a game at Cameron
yeah,
that in the ACC.
yeah. How do you prepare your team for that? What? I mean, obviously, you get the idea of the facility out of their head and where you're going and who they're playing against, and you try and treat it like every other day. But how do you get kids not to not to buy into the emotion of that type of game?
You know what? I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can really, it's honestly, I don't know if you could honestly say, I was able to do that. I was able to do what you just said. It really comes back to how mentally tough is your team,
Yeah,
how physically tough is your team. And I just, I had a kid, my point guard, the year we went there and won was Eric Barkley, who was a New York kid, McDonald's All-American player, Bootsy Thornton from Baltimore, and kids don't get any tougher than Baltimore.
no,
LeVar Postel. I had a 6'4.5" center by the name of Anthony Glover, who used to make 7 footers cry.
right.
We were as tough as nails. We might have been tougher than nails. So it was basically about the mental uh, tenacity and of my kids when to be able to go in there, and they wanted to play at Duke. I wanted to play at Duke. I mean, I still think it is the greatest place to go and play a basketball game. Probably even greater than Madison Square Garden because
Right.
you know uh, a lot of teams can come into a Madison Square Garden and not feel as intimidated as most teams would going into Cameron. I think Cameron. I think the Fog at Kansas. Um, I think those two facilities are probably as tough to play in as any place in the country.
Yeah. The intimacy, the crowd is right on top of you.
Yeah, right on top of you, and they're a great crowd. They know when to get behind their team. They know not to get on their team, and they have like at Duke. They practice it, and the students and the cheer groups. They practice at getting underneath your skin. They actually they are so well scripted for the teams they play. They know everyone on the team, including the coaches. They know any problems you might be having off the court, and any problems a kid might be having with his girlfriend. I mean, they just know how to get in and under your skin like nobody else.
The depth of the research from the student body is just
Oh,
amazing.
I mean,
It's crazy.
they prepare for the opponents going in there like they're preparing for an exam. They know you better than you know yourself.
That's wild.
It
That's
is crazy.
Did you go in as a coach? There's certain things we don't tell our kids, but we're prepared for the things that we know they're not prepared for. There's certain things we just can't prepare a kid for. Are there things that you were prepared for? Like if Duke went on an 8-0 run to start the game, did you have in the back of your mind, I'm going to call an early timeout, or I'm going to get a couple subs in and I'm going to grab a kid and give him a hug, or I'm going to, get him face to face and get some confidence in him? Did you go in with some strategies with a game like that, being prepared for maybe it doesn't go the way you want in the first 4 or 5 minutes?
Yeah, once again, you go in prepared, but then it doesn't mean you're going to carry out your plan.
Right.
And I think the biggest thing you have to be careful of, and I know myself, I committed this sin on too many occasions. I would get on the referees more than I should, and that sometimes sends the wrong signal to your
Yeah.
kid. And that was something I don't think I ever really mastered. I wish if there were such a thing as getting a mulligan and we had a chance to do it all over again, I would have been a lot better and different in that area. But on this particular night when we went and beat Duke, you also know that most of the time it's not going to be 5-on-5. It's going to be 5 versus 6, 7, or 8. And fortunately for us, when we went into that game, there were 3 officials. 2 I knew were going to be totally neutral, and 1 that I knew was going to be totally on the other team. So when we huddled up, the referees, I I did something I never did. I told the referee, the Duke, the homer, I said, "Listen, I've watched you too many games here at Duke, and I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't give me a good game tonight, I'm going to try to embarrass you." And I never did that ever before or again. Uh, and for whatever reason, he gave us as fair a game as he could give an opposing team. I think of a night we were playing at Kentucky when I was at BU, and it was a 1 point, 2 point game at the end of the game, and there was a mysterious call made at midcourt, and my assistant coach, Bill Herrion, who later on coached at places like Drexel and
Yeah.
anyhow,
Yeah. Good coach.
great coach. And
Yeah.
I said, Bill, go out and just find out what was that call? And he went out to the official, and the official said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yes, I'd like to know, what was the basis for that call?" And the official looked at him and said, "Listen, you guys are lucky to be in the game with us. Go back to the bench."
You're kidding me.
I mean,
Ugh.
Bill almost had a heart attack at midcourt, and he didn't tell me what the referee told him at that time, because he knows if he did, I would have probably got thrown out of the arena.
Yeah, I would have too.
And so anyhow, after the game, he told me, and I mean, I never forget that. Hey, you're lucky to be in the game with us. Go back to the bench. They
Was
ended up.
he talking about himself and the other two officials?
He was talking about we're lucky to be in the game. When he said us, he was talking about him and Kentucky.
You gotta be kidding me.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
And they did. That was when I think Rex Chapman was a freshman, and at Kentucky, and we had a shot of beating them, but they weren't going to let us win that game at Kentucky.
was
We
that Patino still?
No, that was who was there? Uh, what's his name? He retired. Hall,
Oh, that was Joe B.
Joby. Yep, Joby Hall.
So Patino was still with the Celtics or the Knicks at that point, or
I think was at. I want to say he was with the Knicks at that time.
yeah. Gosh, that was another guy that was had quite a name for himself, and not always the good way, Joe B.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he hit. They, I mean, they got whatever player they wanted to get.
Yeah, they did.
you know, and I remember they initially they were involved early in the Patrick Ewing hunt, but Patrick he wasn't interested in living in Kentucky, so
What was it like? That was I mean, you were in the Big East. It was some of the best basketball ever. You know,
Yeah.
you when you were in the even at Boston, you were at the heart of some of the best basketball on the East Coast, and that's when teams were just dominating everybody else. What was that like to be? I mean, you never had a night off.
No, no. And I mean, it was great. It was also great being a high school coach in that area. I mean, I can remember many a night taking my high school teams that included Patrick Ewing, over to watch Rick Pitino coach his teams at Boston U, or over to see Dr. Tom Davis coach his teams at Boston College, or go over to Northeastern University and watch Coach Dukeshire coach his team. So you could take a train ride, a 30-minute trip by public transportation to watch some of the greatest coaches in the game and to see their teams play. So that was a big advantage, big blessing that I had.
Well, you were one of them, Coach. You're up there with all of those guys. So I want to talk about recruiting just a little bit. And I know you haven't recruited in about a decade, but when you talk to kids these days at a camp or anywhere you're at, or a parent comes up and talks to you, what advice do you give to families about recruiting?
Well, what I tell them is, I said, they're recruiting you, but I said you got to recruit them. You got to really decide what you want, what type of coach you want, type of system they use. Are you going to be a really big piece in their puzzle? What's the coach's temperament like? The way he coaches his players.
Yeah.
What type of person are you looking for in a coach? So that's the first thing. And then I asked them to look at the system that the coach employs. Is the system that he uses, does it fit your style, the way you play? And I would give them an example of the fact that when I coached the McDonald's All-American team, and Chris Mullins was on my team, and he didn't play very much because we had to go small and quick, and we had to basically play a real fast-paced game. And he was basically best suited for a half-court set type of offense. And fortunately for him, he chose St. John's and played for Lou Carnesecca, which was a perfect fit.
It is. Yeah.
So the fit, that's what I always emphasize. And then, you want to prepare for life after basketball. So who's going to best help you do that? What type of programs do they have for their student athletes? What type of support do they have
Yeah.
if you need extra help? So those were the main things.
You demanded a lot of your kids, like I did too, and especially Bobby Knight was the guy I paid attention to as well. What did you do to make sure the kids you were recruiting, they could handle a guy like you? They could handle what you were gonna ask of them. Were there certain things that you did ahead of time or on their visit?
Well, I mean, basically, I asked them to study me and ask themselves if they could play for me, and that I was going to be really extremely demanding, and I was going to push them. I was going to push them as hard as I would push myself, if not harder. So, I tried to basically keep it as real as possible. So it decided, and he signed that letter of intent. I knew he knew what he was signing in for.
Yeah. With what's going on today, that you really, I mean, rules in place that you didn't have to deal with these kids coming in for a year and saying, I'm not happy. I'm not going to commit. I can go somewhere else. What was that like for you, knowing that I've got this kid for a year, or probably 2 years without a doubt, and I can develop them? We've lost that, haven't we? We've lost that ability to teach these kids about commitment. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, we have, and of course, we're part of the problem too. I mean,
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, there were two different occasions in my life where I was part of that problem. I mean, I left Boston University to go to George Washington. I left George Washington to go to St. John's. Um, so, coaches made the moves. And then eventually the players said, if it's good enough for the goose, it's good enough for the game. It's good enough for me.
Yeah.
And so the rules were changed, and the game changed. We recruited in the old days up until, up until I really went to St. John's. You recruited a kid with the idea that you were going to have him for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to recruit freshmen because I felt if I had 4 years to work with him, I could help really develop him. And also, I enjoyed coaching basically some kids who really hadn't really been coached before.
Right.
So the game, is totally different. There are some coaches now that won't recruit a kid unless he's got college experience. They'll recruit him through the portal.
Right.
And also with the NIL now, some coaches want kids that have been part of that system so that, so that he knows that the kid can handle the money along with the basketball in the school.
Yeah. It's become a lost science because the part about college coaching that I enjoyed is I knew if I had a kid from 18 to 22 or 23 years old, we were going to be pretty good if I had 5 or 6 of those guys.
Oh yeah,
You know?
you could have a team with 5 or 6, 7 of those guys.
Yeah.
And it might take you. You may not be good every year, but you knew that every 3 or 4 years you were going to have a pretty good team,
That's right.
and it was worth waiting for.
Yeah, I preach to kids and parents so much, wherever you go, whatever you decide is going to be your place, give it everything. Make it your home. Make it your
Yeah,
family. You know,
yeah.
if I can give a kid Coach Mike Jarvis for 4 years, that kid is going to be set up for the rest of his life. Their character's going to be there. Their discipline's going to be there. They're going to know how to stand up for themselves. So, that's just such a gift that they're passing up, I think, when you get a coach for a year and that's it.
Yeah, but once again, it's everything's comes back to the dollar. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not even a dollar. I remember when coaches would get together. I was on the board for years, and you're thinking about how can we help these kids get some laundry money,
That's right.
some money to maybe go to McDonald's or go to the movies. Now these kids are pulling up in Rolls Royces and got $250 necklaces or watches or $1,000 whatever. So everything has changed so much. So most of it.
It's such a shame. You had kids that needed just to survive. You,
Oh, hey.
you needed to feed these kids and house these kids and clothe these kids, and the NCAA was slapping your hand for $100.
Oh,
And
that,
now we're giving away $500,000 like it's M&Ms.
well, I was talking with Paul Biancardi,
Yeah,
high school expert, who he was. In fact, I remember Paul coming over to BU one day. He was I think at Suffolk University. It's a real small school in Boston. And he said, Coach, I'd really like to, coach it with you at BU. And I said, Paul, I don't have any job openings right now. I don't have any paid job. He said, Coach, I'll volunteer. So he volunteered and worked with me. In fact, I think we went to the tournament his first year with me. And so at the end of the season, pulled him in. And I says, Paul, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to give you a 500% raise. Because no matter what you multiply times zero, it's still zero. So the second year he went again for nothing. But eventually, he ended up being hired as an assistant at BC with Jim O'Brien, and then he went to Ohio State with him and the Ohio State team. And I know he had a lot to do with it, beat my St. John's team in the Elite Eight. So I was talking with Paul. In fact, last night we were talking about the NIL, and he says, "Yeah," he says, "You know what those letters stand for now?" NIL. I says, "Yeah, a name, image, and likeness." He said, "No." He said, it's now, he says, the letters stand for now it's legal. Now it's
Right.
now it's legal to pay
Now
the,
it's legal.
because it's college basketball is now professional basketball.
It's such a shame. And I haven't talked to a college coach that doesn't know that it's broken. I haven't talked to a college coach that doesn't want it to get organized. And we have a perfect model. We have the NBA. You know,
Yeah,
there's if we're gonna do it, if we're gonna treat these kids like they're employees, let's do it, but let's make it balanced. Let's make sure these kids can stay for a while. Let's give them a life. Let's teach them how to put money away.
yeah,
So when they do get out, they have something left.
yeah.
So do you have some thoughts on that, on what you'd like to see them do?
Well, I know years ago, I what we had proposed was that, when schools made this money off of these kids, that it'd be put in a big pot, and and at the end of the 4 years or whatever, it would be divided up equally among the players, but it would, but you had to graduate to get the money.
I love that.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that never flew. In fact, nothing really changed until I think the NCAA realized that they were in danger of losing their jobs and going out of business.
Yep.
That's when they basically just said, you know what, do whatever you want to do, and it set no real boundaries. So I mean, it's going to be awfully difficult to change things now that the gates of hell have been opened.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it
Yep.
was. Remember the day when, I mean, I think there was a time when it was legal to give kids, quote unquote, laundry money. Then it went to nothing. I mean, I've had kids come to my school, like at Boston U. We had a kid come one year. They took a collection up for him in his town that he lived in, and sent him off to Boston, probably one of the most expensive cities in the world, with $22 to his name, and no winter clothes. I mean, coming to this, we got more snow. I mean, it was almost criminal. And if I, were to, let's say, clothe the kid properly or put a few bucks in his pocket, it would have been illegal.
Right.
But you know what, coaches, sometimes, you do what you have to do. And I mean, hey, like I would tell all my players, I don't want you ever to be penniless.
That's
You,
right.
you may not have more than $5 in your pocket, but you're going to have at least that.
Amen.
So, I mean, I can say that now because I'm not coaching, and I
Yeah.
can't get fired for it.
Yeah. But it's no, none of us got into this business just to win. We got into this business to raise kids
Yeah,
and to give them better lives. And
yeah,
when you can't take care of a kid, just the basic needs of their life,
that's
there's
right.
something wrong with that.
Yeah, you come to Boston, you don't have any winter clothes, you don't have any boots, you
Yeah.
don't have an overcoat.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? Just let the kid die from pneumonia? No.
Yeah.
You go to your friends and family and say, "Hey, listen, do you have anything you can gift to a needy kid?"
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and you do what you have to do.
It's amazing how far we've come in 10 years, let alone 25, 30 years.
Absolutely.
And to see where we're at now, it's disheartening. We skipped over the best part of what this could have been. We could have been humble. We could have been generous. We could have been smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, Coach, I am so thankful for it's an honor for me to spend time with you. You're one of my favorite coaches and in the history of the game. I've always loved your teams. I've always been the underdog coach. I never had the budget. I never had the money. I never had the school name. And, you know, I've always had to create things on my own. So you've been that role model for me because everywhere you've been, you took a place that wasn't supposed to be great and you've made it great and you've graduated kids and those kids are great men in the world today because of you. So I'm so thankful for the time I've gotten to spend with you.
Well, I thank you very, very much. It's always good to go back down memory lane and to share, things that you may have done right, you may have done wrong with
Right.
somebody who really cares. And I appreciate the fact that you called me. I don't get too many calls these days.
You
So
should.
yeah, probably, but guess what? It's the way it is. And so when I get a call from someone like yourself, it means a lot that somebody still remembers you. Because when I played, I wasn't a really good player, so I didn't get a whole lot of headlines as a player. And I used to enjoy folks would come up and say, "Hey, coach, can I have your autograph?"
That's right.
It meant a lot to me as much as it meant to them.
Well, this is my autograph, just so you know. I having a chance to talk to you is much better than anything you can put on paper to me. So I've got one question I'm going to ask you. I ask all the coaches that come on, what's the most significant thing that you can share? And a lot of high school kids and parents listen to this, high school coaches listen to this. What's the most significant thing that you can share with my audience?
Something that a lot of things, but I mean, I know we don't have another hour, but I always would try to tell coaches to recognize the fact that the best coach and cheerleader that you're ever going to have is your wife. And that, if basketball, your family can be a part of the equation. So try to make your family part of the equation. And I think if you do that, and I was fortunate, my son and I were the first African American father-son coaching team in the history of Division I basketball.
Absolutely.
We worked together for almost 20 years. And that's what, other than the money, I miss that more than anything.
Yeah.
And my wife basically became my full-time coach. So those are the things that like I said, appreciate your wife, appreciate your kids, try to really incorporate them into your lifestyle, because
Yeah.
coaching is not a job, it's a lifestyle.
Absolutely. Coach, thank you so much. If there's anything I can ever do for you or your organizations that you work with and the people you work with, don't be afraid to ask. But I appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
The first thing you can do for me is send me a copy of this time that we spent together. Okay,
I will, sir.
When you get a chance.
For sure, Coach. It'll be my honor. Thanks again, Coach, for spending some time with me today. I enjoyed every second of it. Please keep being you, and I hope we have you around for a long time. We need your wisdom. We need your passion.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. Okay, appreciate you.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Significant Coaching Podcast. I'd like to thank Coach Mike Jarvis for sharing his wisdom and amazing stories from his legendary coaching career. If you're enjoying these conversations, please click that subscribe and or like buttons. If you are interested in working with me or scheduling me to speak at your school or organization, you can schedule a free strategy session at coachmattrogers.com. Hey, thanks again for listening. Have a significant week. Goodbye until next time.